welcome to this week's edition of News for Scotland. We're a team of just 2 volunteers dedicated to bringing you Scottish news that the Anglo-mainstream media chooses not to cover, such as a bid by Liberation Scotland to have Scotland added to the United Nations list of non-self-governing territories for decolonisation, for example. Mainstream media chooses not to cover this momentous story, almost certainly the most important story to come out of Scotland in 300 years. But we believe that Scots deserve to know what's really happening in Scotland and not what the London media says is happening here or what a compliant mainstream media chooses to ignore. However, we all need a holiday, and that means that next week's show, due for broadcast on the 20th of June, will go ahead as usual, but without a presenter. We will still bring you the stories of that week using our ticker tape, which will go into more detail than our ticker tape usually does, so you don't miss out on what's happening in Scotland. However, holiday and sickness cover does represent a weak link for our channel, which is still less than a year old and which survives on the generosity of our viewers to keep us going. The aim is for the Scotland channel to eventually become totally self-sustaining, but in the meantime your support is crucial. By watching and sharing all of our videos available at youtube.com/at the Scotland channel/videos, you'll be helping us to get more viewers. Please also subscribe to the channel on YouTube. You can also support us by making a regular donation to the channel. Look at our website, and that's www.thescotlandchannel.tv/#donate. And if you have current or previous YouTuber broadcasting experience and you feel you could help us to read the news, particularly during holidays and sickness periods, we'd love to hear from you. Contact us again on our website, that's thescotlandchannel.tv/contact. Now let's get on with the news. An Oxford University professor says that Scottish independence has already begun. Speaking to the Sunday National, Professor Danny Dorling said there's been a growing cultural and political divide north and south of the border, with this divergence particularly noticeable in social policies such as the Scottish child payment. He cited the child payment as the main reason why child poverty rates are falling in Scotland while they continue to rise in England and Wales. He said English politicians were just not looking at the Scottish example of how to bring poverty rates down, adding that the difference comes down to the culture of English elitist politics, with many English MPs, academics and analysts coming from a narrow dinner party world. Professor Dorling said that Scotland had gone from having the worst poverty rates in Europe to now having the lower rates than any region of England. He said the divide between English and Scottish politics, especially among young people, is widening, adding, "We no longer get Scottish students down here." He said, "I haven't met a Scottish student here for 12 years. Well, why would you want to travel down to England and pay fees?" The BBC is proposing to alter its drama output in a bid to win over Reform UK voters, an expert on mainstreaming the far right has said. BBC bosses, including Director General Tim Davie, have reportedly drawn up plans to win over Reform voters due to a belief that their news and drama output is creating low trust issues, as they put it, with supporters of Nigel Farage. Minutes from a meeting of the broadcaster's Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee from March, revealed by the Byline Times, showed that the BBC's chief executive, Deborah Turness, gave a presentation in which she discussed plans to alter story selection and other types of output such as drama to win the trust of Reform voters. Professor Aurelian Mondon, an expert at the University of Bath on the mainstreaming of the far right, said he's concerned that the BBC are caving in to a backlash against equality and diversity, with these plans largely spearheaded by US President Trump. British Labour and Scotland's leader Anna Sarwar hit out at BBC journalist Martin Geisler for asking embarrassing questions in a TV interview after he refused to speak about Labour's damaging Westminster policy decisions. Sarwar dodged questions about his previous comments on GB Energy, in which he claimed prior to the general election last year that GB Energy would create 69,000 jobs. But GB Energy says it expects to create only 200 or 300 jobs in Aberdeen, the brass plate headquarters of their organisation, within 5 years, and a further 600 to 700 jobs in England over the next 20 years. Later in the interview, as Sarwar tried to turn the focus onto Scotland's NHS, Geisler tried to make the point about immigration policy impacting the health service's ability to get staff. Refusing to acknowledge that Westminster's policies are impacting on Scotland's NHS, Sarwar claimed it's down to mismanagement of the SNP. An exasperated Geisler then asked Sarwar about his previous claims that he was speaking to the Home Office about a bespoke visa system for Scotland's needs. But when asked if Scotland could get its own immigration system, Sarwar replied, "No, why would we have our own immigration system?" "I thought you'd said you'd had talks with the UK government about a bespoke Scottish visa system," Geisler asked. "Again, Martin, you are misleading in your characterisation," Sarwar said. Orkney's Tomb of the Eagles, an ancient archaeological site, is set to reopen to the public after community campaigners secured over £101,000 support from a National Lottery Heritage Fund. Located at the top of South Ronaldsay Cliffs, it's an important feature of Orkney's ancient archaeology, which was forced to close to visitors as a result of the pandemic and the subsequent retirement of the owners. Local campaigners have been working with the support of a family that owns the site to take it into community ownership and to reopen it to visitors. The news comes just a few weeks after South Ronaldsay and Bury Development Trust announced they had secured Scottish Land Fund investment. The Tomb of the Eagles, or Ibster Chambered Cairn, is a Neolithic chambered tomb located on a cliff edge at Ibster on South Ronaldsay. The community are also seeking to improve the visitor centre to renovate the museum displays, the shop and the toilet facilities, and provide snacks and hot drinks, as well as to upgrade the pathways around the site. Despite recent heavy rain, long-term water scarcity pressures remain after one of the driest starts to the year for decades, according to SEPA, that's the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency. The latest water scarcity report from SEPA shows widespread improvement across the west of the country. In contrast, some catchments in the north and northeast are continuing to deteriorate, while others have not seen enough rain to recover. Last week, Wick and Helmsdale river catchments have been raised to moderate water scarcity. If locally dry conditions continue, areas including the Avon catchment area, that's around the Spey, the Lower Dee and the Water of Fuch and Helmsdale may reach significant scarcity in a few days, meaning restrictions on businesses taking water out of the environment. Rain over the last week has led to recovery in areas of the west coast, the Highlands and Islands, but the east has remained largely dry, due in part to the rain shadow effect, where moist air loses much of its rain as it moves over mountains, leaving drier conditions on the other side. This spring has been the second driest in 100 years in eastern Scotland, and some areas have had below average rainfall for more than 12 months. While rain is forecast in the next few days, SEPA hydrologists say that well above average rainfall will be needed to reverse the effects of the long dry spell. Claire Tunnelly, the senior hydrologist of water resources at SEPA, said, Our drought risk assessment tool, known as DRAT, uses some data from river gauging stations to monitor flows closely. If flows at these stations fall below the Q95 threshold for 30 consecutive days, it indicates significant water scarcity and a high risk of ecological impact. Q95 means the flow is lower than you would expect on 95% of days in a typical year, in other words, extremely low. When rivers reach critical lows, it affects whole ecosystems, including fish, plants, and the wider natural balance. Protecting these ecosystems now helps maintain the long-term health of our rivers. Ellie Johnson, SEPA's Senior Manager in Water Industry and Rural Economy, said, If restrictions are necessary, they'll be targeted, time-limited, and lifted as soon as conditions allow. We want to support Scotland's water resilience and make our decisions based on science and hard facts. That's what powers Scotland's National Water Scarcity Plan and our weekly assessments. It's a coordinated, evidence-driven response to a serious environmental pressure. A Highland port is to receive more than £24 million in funding to expand its dry dock, creating up to 1,500 jobs. Highlands and Islands Enterprises, HIE, has announced it will invest the money at Kishorn Port in the West Highlands, with plans to also develop land so that floating offshore wind foundations can be manufactured on the site. The expanded facilities could attract projects with the potential to get up to 1,500 jobs once the port is fully operational, according to HIE. Kishorn was used in the 1970s for the construction of the Ninian Central oil production platform, which at the time was the world's largest floating concrete structure and has one of the largest openings of any dry dock facility in Europe. This investment forms part of the Scottish Government's commitment of up to £500 million over 5 years to develop ports and offshore wind supply energy. The Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes said the investment is a clear signal from the Scottish Government which will help to boost confidence in potential investors. Food and drink festivals, farmers' markets and culinary masterclasses are just some of the projects from across Scotland set to benefit from grants of up to £5,000. The latest round of the Regional Food Fund will support 15 local projects helping small food businesses to thrive while promoting local produce. Scotland Food and Drink manages the fund aimed at elevating the food and drink industry, enhancing food tourism and showcasing the best the country has to offer. Rural Affairs Secretary Mary Gougeon said, Scotland's food and drink industry is worth £15 billion to the economy. It's one of the country's largest employers and is already well established and recognised across the world. Over 50% of arts workers have experienced or witnessed bullying, sexual harassment or abuse, according to stark new research from Scotland's largest trade union body. Freelance and Forgotten, a report on worker exploitation in Scotland's creative industries, was launched last week by the Scottish Trade Union Congress, and it outlines the scale of abuse suffered by Scotland's freelance workers in the arts sector. The data reveals that 53% have experienced or seen bullying, harassment or sexual harassment within the sector, with 32% of workers having to sign a non-disclosure agreement forbidding them to talk about their work. In addition, testimony given to the report shows that 69% of workers have experienced late payment in relation to their work and 33% have not been paid at all for freelance work. The union body, alongside creative arts unions across Scotland, are calling on the Scottish Government to embed fair work for Scotland's freelance and creative workers. The sector, worth over £5 billion to the economy in Scotland, supports 100,000 workers, and it could be a leading light in fair work, according to STUC's General Secretary Ros Foyer. This report comes as the Scottish Government's Culture Fair Work Task Force are due to publish their recommendations on embedding fair work within the culture sector. Commenting, Ros Foyer said it's abundantly clear that however well-intentioned the Scottish Government are with their fair work agenda, it simply does not exist for workers within the creative sector. Fair work means fair work. It doesn't mean, as our report found, hundreds of workers being subject to bullying, sexual harassment and abuse within a sector built upon precarity and inequality. The Scottish Government must take seriously our findings and hear the voices of Scotland's creative workers if we are to protect and enhance their livelihoods. With well over 100,000 workers in the sector, the arts in Scotland could be the leading light in fair work. However, that simply cannot be done whilst the rights of creative workers continue to be ridden roughshod by shoddy employers and poor employment practices. This must change, and the Scottish Government and all sector partners must work together to make fair work a reality. Musicians Union Regional Organiser Caroline Sewell said, whilst this report will read as somewhat shocking for many, sadly, there won't be many surprises for those working in creative industries in Scotland who are acutely aware of these issues, which this report holds up the light to. It's clear from these findings that freelance musicians and other creative workers are being routinely undervalued, underpaid and mistreated in an industry that simply could not function without them. Enough is enough. That winds up our stories for this week. Join us again on the Scotland Channel every Friday night from 7 p.m. Don't forget, once released, you can view all our shows anytime on the Scotland Channel. Support us by linking, sharing and subscribing to our YouTube page Thanks for watching.